My name is Hars. I'm founder and CEO of Tarform. How many of you are into motorcycles? How, how many people been on the back of a motorbike? Okay. How many been on a Revel? Electric. Okay, so you kind of get the sense of moving on two wheels, yeah? Everyone obviously heard about Tesla. This is what EVs looked 15 years ago before Tesla. And like they've been around, but probably none of you remember that this existed. And of course, this company came and completely changed the landscape of what an electric car should be. So that's kind of the space we operate in, which is basically how do we revive the iconic status of a motorcycle. So if I tell you, picture a motorcycle rider today, it would probably not be this image. So the motorcycle kind of had an iconic status in the 60s, 70s. You had Marlon Brando, Steve McQueen, and it was sort of like an iconic symbol. Today, this is probably the image you see of a motorcycle rider. And Harley Davidson is an iconic brand, but their sales basically halved in the last 10 years because the average Harley rider is 54 years old. They go to Sturgis. So there was sort of a big opportunity to how do we take the soul and spirit of this machine and then reposition it for this century. So most people see the motorcycle as transportation, but for people who get into this field, it becomes a way of life. And for me, I grew up in Sweden, so I started riding in my early 20s, and I tried a Kawasaki, and everything that you think, sort of the cliche thing of riding a motorcycle, the experience of freedom, that you're exposed, like that's all true. So, but it's also a dangerous thing. So it's not for everyone, but I highly recommend. Just try it out. So there's something magical about this machine on two wheels, and there's very few products that people choose to put the brand logos on their bodies. So there are tons of people putting Harley Davidson, probably not as many people putting Toyota. So when we started Tarform, we knew that there is a massive opportunity to sort of how do we create a brand around an iconic object such as a motorcycle, and what are the values we have to instill to sort of make the motorcycle cool again. So here are some of the existing market leaders. So these are all electric motorcycles. Are you familiar with any of these? Nobody. Okay, so this one is Harley Davidson. They launched an electric motorcycle a couple of years ago. Nobody knows about them. Most people don't care. This is Zero Motorcycles. They've been around for 15 years out of Santa Cruz. Also, most people probably never seen. So needless to say, we felt, okay, here's, again, how do we revive sort of the spirit of an iconic motorcycle and build it with three core values? And you're all probably creatives, marketers, brand people. You realize the value of having a solid platform and a foundation. So what's sort of the core pillars of your brand? And for us, it was art. How do we preserve the spirit of craftsmanship? How do we bring back sort of what the integrity and the quality of a product from the 60s, the 70s? How do we use technology? Because we live in a technological age. So instead of sort of using technology in form of obsolescence, meaning that instead of designing things to fail, how do we design machines that keep evolve with pace of time? And number three, ecology. So as makers of physical things, it is our responsibility to do the least amount of harm during the production of these machines. So how do we honor nature and start looking at sustainable materials? So that's the bike. It took us about 2 years to build a prototype back of a shop in Gowanus in Brooklyn. It was literally me and two guys at back of like a classical garage startup, and people were like, that's never going to work. You're going to start a motorcycle company from scratch. Forget it. So that was 2018 when we launched our first prototype, and then basically began a very long journey going from a prototype to a manufacturable bike. And during that time, sort of crafting the narrative and the brand and the story of how do we make Tarform not just an electric motorcycle, but how do we really tell a new story? Again, if you're in the motorcycle space, most motorcycle riders go to these rallies and events. This is Sturgis, one of the biggest one in the world. and it's the same person. So we knew that with our values and our design, how do we find sort of the next generation of the rider? So the first question we asked is, who is the Tarform rider, and where do we find them? And kind of mapping out sort of this Venn diagram of our values. So art, where do people who care about art, where do they hang out? How do we get into those places? People who like technology, how do we get into that world? And ecology, people who care about nature and sustainability and so on. So by focusing on sort of these three core values, the rest became fairly straightforward. And also playing with sort of dichotomy of technology and nature, art and motorcycles, the brand kind of naturally started evolving, and we started getting kind of a different resonance. So New York Times wrote an article about a plant-based motorcycle that sounds like a breathing cheetah. So we designed a sound to the bike that gives it kind of a natural hum. And we were going to bring it here, but it didn't fit in the elevator. So go to our website if you want to hear how it sounds. And then we started getting, basically most of our marketing and exposure was inbound because there was something different that we wanted to say. And instead of getting featured in motorcycle magazines, we started getting featured in art magazines, lifestyle, fashion. And then obviously we had to get the bike out there for people to experience it, to see it in real life. So although we knew sort of what the community would look like, we had no idea who this would appeal to. So we started doing events at Classic Car Club. I don't know if you know it. It's a community out in Hudson Yards. We got invited to exhibit the bike at Museum Modern Art, which was a huge thing because, again, we wanted to position the motorcycle in the context of art and less as a classic motorbike. We did a couple of retail pop-ups. One of them was Naked Retail, which is just a couple of blocks from here. I think it was 2 years ago. And obviously allowing people to experience the bike. So getting on the machine, offering test rides. And what we started noticing is a community started forming of people who are not your traditional biker, and the same sentence started coming up. I didn't know I wanted a bike until I saw this. So there was this whole unspoken demographic of people who said, this whole motorcycle thing doesn't appeal to me, like wearing a leather jacket and the entire perception of like the stereotype biker. Our bike approached a completely different person, someone that came from the creative industry, from technology design, which is exactly sort of our main values. And we said, okay, that's interesting. It's almost like you're crafting a language and then you're creating a space for your community to find you, instead of what a lot of brands do is kind of forcefully trying to feed you something that doesn't feel very authentic. So the insight is, stay consistent, really figure out what is your brand language, what do you stand for, and if you know that and you really embody that, a lot of things come pretty naturally. And also showing kind of the behind the build. So our space in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, each bike is handcrafted in Brooklyn, and we wanted to bring our community and show this is how we're making the bike. So invite them and start having sort of discussions about the materials we use, the difference between different manufacturing methods, and really bringing them into the process. Getting the bike out in nature, offering test rides, experiences again, and basically delivering something that's memorable and offers a quality. And is one of my favorite quotes about Gucci: quality is remembered long after the price is forgotten. So especially if you're a brand in the premium space, what people are willing to pay above the cost of the product has everything to do with branding. And branding is basically that essence, that magical thing that people say, you know what, that thing is worth it for me. Not because the cost of it, but because of the extra feeling and the emotional value that the brand gives you. And then more experiments, how do we get the bike into our Basel different museums? We tried a couple of luxury dealerships. Many times they didn't resonate with the community. Sometimes we were in the wrong space. We did an event at Dumbo House, brought the bike on top of a rooftop, and people came by, sipped like, oh, that's cool, that's not my thing. So while being kind of consistent, I think the trick is also having the courage to experiment and trying different things and adapting and really listening. How does your message being received? So when your voice is clear, collaborations happen effortlessly. And often I get a question like, how the hell did you get Lewis Hamilton to write your bike for Wall Street Journal? And how many millions did this photo shoot cost? And nothing. And because we sort of planted the seeds of this is what we stand for, a plant-based motorcycle, handcrafted, they reach out to us like, oh, this is your values represent what Lewis Hamilton stands for, a plant-based guy into F1. So that sort of collaboration happened pretty naturally, mainly because we created and crafted a fairly consistent voice. And the Disney Channel approached us, and Jeff Goldblum did a feature about the bike, talking about plant-based materials and how do you make motorcycle out of pineapple and so on. So the media obviously found their ways to kind of craft the baseline of our story and then interpret it into different ways. So basically, like, what is organic growth? Because we haven't really spent any money on marketing and customer acquisition, and again, allowed the brand breathe naturally. And my insight is give your community something to care about, and obviously the product is sort of the base. And me coming from the brand world, previously I've seen so many companies that basically say, well, here's my product. I need to find the right community, and we need to find our purpose and our values. And many times it's like you're going and you're asking someone, you tell me who I am. So I think a brand needs to really figure out, like, who am I? What do I stand for? What am I telling to people? And if you have that honed in and it's an interesting story, things should more or less fall into place, but also a ton of experimentation and hustle. That's it. Thanks so much.